Welcome to Learn English Fast. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear and fun. Listen, relax and enjoy the journey.
In the beautiful city of Verona, Italy, two powerful families, the Montagues and the Capulets, had been enemies for as long as anyone could remember. Their hatred for each other ran so deep that even a simple meeting between members of the two families could spark fights, violence, and bloodshed. The streets of Verona were often stained with the consequences of their endless feud. Amidst this bitter rivalry, two young souls, Romeo, a passionate boy from the Montague family, and Juliet, a sweet and innocent girl from the Capulet family, were destined to cross paths in a way that would change their lives and the fate of their families forever. Romeo Montague was a dreamer, a young man with a heart full of emotions. At the start of our story, he was deeply in love with a girl named Rosaline. However, Rosaline didn't feel the same way about him, and her coldness left Romeo heartbroken. He spent his days sighing and wandering the streets, lost in thoughts of unreturned love. His close friends, Mercutio and Benvolio, grew tired of seeing him so sad. They decided to cheer him up by taking him to a grand party at the Capulet house. Of course, this was a risky idea since the Montagues were not welcome there. To avoid being recognized, they wore masks to hide their identities and slipped into the celebration. The Capulet house was filled with music, laughter, and the glow of candles. People danced and chatted, unaware of the Montague intruders. It was here, in this lively and colorful setting, that Romeo first laid eyes on Juliet Capulet. Juliet, only 13 years old, was a vision of beauty with her delicate features and gentle smile. Her parents had already planned for her to marry Count Paris, a nobleman of Verona who was kind and wealthy. But Juliet's heart was still untouched, until that night. As Romeo watched her from across the room, it felt as if the world around him faded away. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, an unspoken connection formed between them. They moved closer during a dance, their hands touching lightly. Neither knew the other's family name, but their hearts spoke a language of their own. Romeo whispered sweet words to Juliet, and she blushed, feeling something she had never felt before. It was love at first sight. But this magical moment was shattered when they discovered the harsh truth. Romeo was a Montague, and Juliet was a Capulet. Their families were sworn enemies. Yet, this revelation couldn't stop the fire of love that had already ignited in their hearts. They knew they were meant to be together, no matter the cost. That very night, unable to stay away from Juliet, Romeo took a daring step. He sneaked into the Capulet estate under the cover of darkness, and stood beneath Juliet's balcony. The garden was quiet, filled with the scent of flowers and the soft glow of the moon. Juliet, unaware of Romeo's presence, stepped onto her balcony and began speaking to herself about her feelings for him. She poured out her heart, wishing aloud that their family's hatred wouldn't stand in the way of their love. Romeo, listening below, felt his heart swell with joy. He stepped forward, revealing himself, and called out to her. Startled but overjoyed, Juliet looked down and saw him. They spoke for hours, confessing their love and promising to be true to each other no matter what challenges lay ahead. This moment, often called the balcony scene, is one of the most famous in all of literature. Under the starry sky, they dreamed of a future where they could be together openly. They knew their love was dangerous, but it was also pure and unstoppable. Before parting, they vowed to find a way to unite, even if it meant defying their families. The next day, Romeo went to see Friar Lawrence, a kind and wise priest who knew both families. Romeo shared his love for Juliet and begged the friar to marry them in secret. Friar Lawrence was hesitant at first, knowing the risks of such a union. But he also saw an opportunity. He believed that if Romeo and Juliet were married, their love might finally end the long-standing feud between the Montagues and the Capulets. With this hope in his heart, he agreed to perform the ceremony in a small, hidden chapel, with only Friar Lawrence and Juliet's nurse as witnesses. Romeo and Juliet exchanged vows. They promised to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. The moment was filled with joy, but also with fear. They knew that their marriage had to remain a secret for now. Juliet returned to her family's home, pretending everything was normal, while Romeo carried the warmth of their union in his heart. They both dreamed of a day when they could reveal their love to the world and bring peace to Verona. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived. On the very day of their secret wedding, trouble brewed in the streets of Verona. Tybalt, Juliet's hot-tempered cousin from the Capulet family, had seen Romeo at the party and felt insulted by his presence. Furious, Tybalt sought Romeo out and challenged him to a duel. Romeo, now married to Juliet, considered Tybalt family and refused to fight. He tried to explain that he had no wish for violence, but Tybalt wouldn't listen. Mercutio, Romeo's fiery and loyal friend, couldn't stand to see Romeo humiliated. He stepped in and drew his sword, engaging Tybalt in a fierce battle. The clash of steel echoed through the streets as a crowd gathered to watch. Romeo tried to stop the fight, but it was too late. Tybalt struck Mercutio with a fatal blow, and Mercutio fell to the ground, cursing both houses for their senseless hatred before dying in Romeo's arms. Overcome with grief and rage, Romeo lost control. He chased after Tybalt and, in a fit of anger, killed him with his own sword. The consequences were immediate and severe. Prince Aeschylus, the ruler of Verona, was fed up with the constant fighting between the two families. He arrived at the scene and declared that Romeo must be punished for Tybalt's death. Instead of sentencing him to death, the prince showed mercy by exiling Romeo from Verona. Romeo was forced to leave the city and flee to Mantua, a nearby town. Before leaving, he managed to spend one heartbreaking night with Juliet, their first and only night as husband and wife. As dawn broke, they parted with tears in their eyes, unsure if they would ever see each other again. Juliet stayed behind, pretending to be the obedient daughter while her heart ached for Romeo. Back in Verona, things grew even worse for Juliet. Her parents, unaware of her secret marriage, decided it was time for her to marry Count Paris. They believed this marriage would bring honor to their family and secure Juliet's future. Juliet was horrified. She couldn't imagine being with anyone but Romeo. In desperation, she turned to Friar Lawrence for help. Begging him to find a way out of this forced marriage, Friar Lawrence came up with a daring and risky plan. He gave Juliet a special potion that would make her appear dead for 42 hours. Her breathing would slow, her body would grow cold, and everyone would believe she had passed away. The plan was for Juliet to take the potion the night before her wedding to Paris. Her family would place her body in the Capulet family tomb, thinking she was gone. Meanwhile, Friar Lawrence would send a message to Romeo in Mantua, telling him to return to Verona and wait by the tomb. When Juliet awoke, Romeo would be there to take her away, and they could start a new life together far from Verona's hatred. Juliet agreed to the plan, though she was terrified. That night, alone in her room, she held the small vial of potion in her trembling hands. She thought of Romeo, whispered a prayer for courage, and drank the bitter liquid. Soon, her body grew still, and she fell into a deep, death-like sleep. The next morning, her family found her lifeless and wept over what they believed was her death. They dressed her in white, placed flowers around her, and carried her to the dark, cold tomb of the Capulets, mourning the loss of their beloved daughter. Everything depended on Romeo receiving Friar Lawrence's message. But fate had other plans. The friar sent a messenger to Mantua with the urgent letter explaining the plan. Unfortunately, the messenger was delayed because of a plague outbreak in the area. The roads were closed, and he couldn't reach Romeo in time. Instead, Romeo's loyal servant, Balthasar, heard the news of Juliet's death, and rushed to Mantua to tell him. When Romeo heard that Juliet was gone, his world collapsed. He couldn't bear the thought of living without her. Overwhelmed by grief, he decided to return to Verona one last time to see her, even if it meant risking his life as an exiled man. In Verona, Romeo went straight to the Capulet tomb under the cover of night. He bought a deadly poison from a local apothecary before entering the dark crypt. The tomb was silent and eerie, filled with the shadows of death. There, lying on a stone slab surrounded by flowers, was Juliet, still and pale, looking like an angel in eternal sleep. Romeo knelt beside her, tears streaming down his face. He spoke to her, telling her how much he loved her and how he couldn't live without her. Believing she was truly gone, he kissed her cold lips one last time, then drank the poison. Within moments, his body weakened, and he collapsed beside her, taking his last breath with her name on his lips. Tragically, just minutes after Romeo's death, Juliet began to stir. The potion's effect wore off, and she opened her eyes, expecting to see Romeo waiting for her as planned. Instead, she saw his lifeless body next to her. Her heart shattered as she realized what had happened. She called his name, shook him, and wept bitterly, but he was gone. Unable to imagine a life without him, Juliet made a heartbreaking decision. She took Romeo's dagger from his side, held it to her chest, and whispered her love for him one last time. With a final act of devotion, she plunged the dagger into her heart and fell beside him, their bodies entwined in death as they had wished to be in life. The next morning, the tragic scene was discovered. Friar Lawrence, who had been anxiously waiting for news, arrived at the tomb with members of both families. They found Romeo and Juliet lying together, their hands almost touching even in death. The Montagues and Capulets, who had spent years hating each other, stood in stunned silence as the friar explained the secret marriage and the failed plan. The weight of their loss was unbearable. They realized that their senseless feud had cost them the lives of their beloved children. In that moment of shared grief, the hatred between the two families melted away. Lord Montague and Lord Capulet looked at each other with tears in their eyes and shook hands, promising to end their conflict forever. They vowed to honor Romeo and Juliet by building golden statues of the young lovers in the heart of Verona, a reminder of the price of hatred and the power of love. Prince Aeschylus, who had tried for so long to bring peace to the city, spoke sadly of the tragedy. saying that never had a story been so full of sorrow as that of Juliet and her Romeo. The story of Romeo and Juliet is more than just a tale of young love. It is a powerful warning about the dangers of hatred, pride, and prejudice. The love between Romeo and Juliet was pure and beautiful, a light in the darkness of their family's feud. Yet, it was destroyed by the very hatred they had no part in creating. Their deaths show us that love can be a force for healing, but only if we let go of bitterness and choose understanding over conflict. Their story reminds us to value the people we love and to work for peace, so that no more young lives are lost to meaningless fights.